Hey, everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. Today we have Dr. Tasha Eurich. Let me tell you, Tasha and she's a PhD expert in self awareness. But what we really get into is not only why is self awareness kind of the differentiator, that what makes a difference in an individual, but more as a team, as a leader and team dynamics. And we dive into the not the safe environment, but the expectations that come up. How can you learn yourself? But how can you make it be a better person for others? Now, where a lot of us are surrounded by the quote walls, mirrors, and liars, and it's interesting that 95% of us think we're self-aware, but only 10 or 15% really are. This comes from Tasha's research. So we dive into the research side of this, but I think the reason you'll like this the most is how practical and powerful this conversation is. So here we go. Tasha and Gucci, ready? Hit it. Hello, Tasha. Welcome to the High Performance Zone. And I want to say thank you for this opportunity because your expertise in self-awareness is something that I'm personally working on. And I think so many of us need to get better. But tell me, first off, welcome to the show and tell me, why are you so passionate about the concept of self-awareness?
Well, first of all, thank you, John, for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation. And I've been a self-awareness nerd for as long as I can remember, which is, yeah, I don't know if I should be saying that to everyone as
I
like the
love
first
it.
thing they hear about me.
Yeah.
I've been an organizational psychologist for more than 20 years now. So just loving the intersection of human behavior and how can businesses thrive and help their teams thrive. But I really started to become interested in this topic probably about 10 years ago in earnest. And I coach executives for a living. That's what I do when I'm not speaking and writing. And I started to see a clear and distinct pattern. If there were some CEOs and, CXOs that I would coach that, were really trying to do the best they could every day, just trying to keep their heads above water. We're following the process, but not sort of going overboard. And, for the most part, things were fine for them. Every
Mhm.
once in a while, somebody would crash and burn. But then I saw a second group of executives who dove into the process of questioning how they saw themselves, getting new feedback, challenging their own assumptions. And, not because I'm so great, but because they made that commitment, they were the ones who would always see just these dramatic turnarounds. I mean, I'm talking people who are about to be fired by their board to people who were outperforming from everything from, their people metrics to their stock price. And I started to wonder what distinguished these people. And
Mhm.
my theory was that it was something around self-awareness. And right around that time, self-awareness was becoming this huge buzzword, right? It was
Mm.
everywhere. But as a scientist, which is kind of my original background, I wanted to know, what was the truth? Like, what did the science actually say about what self-awareness is and where it comes from and why we need it? And then assuming that was all true, how do we get more of it? So that was when I convened a research team of about a dozen people. We're still going. It's been 10 years and we can't stop finding questions to answer, but to just really kind of answer those questions, not just from my anecdotal perspective, but from
Right.
a rigorous scientific standpoint.
Well, I can't wait to dive into some of that science because um, I agree in that it's so important as a business executive, but really in life to understand yourself first, and coming from my background, flying on the Blue Angels, we never really studied self-awareness, but as I reflect back, it was so essential that everybody was extremely self-aware. When you're flying, 36 inches, 18 inches from somebody, it really starts with inside first, right? And then you can actually expand that out to beyond yourself. So maybe let's dive into, first off, when you say self-awareness as a scientist, how do you define it? What does self-awareness mean? And I think you spent a long time before coming up with this clear definition of it, right? How do you define
Yeah, we did. I sort of naively thought, we'll read 1,000 empirical journal articles. We'll do, a dozen studies of people all around the world, and it'll just sort of make itself known what the definition was. But it actually took us almost a year to scientifically define this. And this is like, so you guys don't have to read all these articles and do all this. It's simplicity on the other side of complexity. And the
Hey, real
way
quick, Tasha, before you tell it, because I want people to be anxious. I want them to go, wait a minute, what is it? What is it? It took a year to read all this stuff. I always love getting the executive summary. I love that you did the research, right? Because somebody has to really dive in to understand the nuances that make it different. So I want to say that as a host, but more importantly, as a listener, I'm excited. I can't wait to figure out what is this definition. Go for it. So
well, I hope it's everything everyone hoped it would be. And I'm doing a dramatic reality show pause, right? But so it's actually pretty simple. Good. Self-awareness is the will and the skill to understand who we are on the inside and how other people see us.
Oh, wow. Okay, there's some deep stuff in there. All right. Let's unpack this together. So first off, the will and the skill. Why did you come up with those two words?
Because if we don't feel the commitment and the value to the process, we're going to maybe do it. We might not do it at all, or we might do it for a while and then lose interest. And you know, part of that has to do with knowing really clearly what all the benefits are. And I'm sure we'll go into that, but that's why, you know, the will is the first decision you make on your self-awareness journey. Okay. The skill, thankfully, shows that it is one of the most improvable skills, I believe, that's out there. So this isn't something that you're born with and you either have or you don't have. Right. It's something that anyone at any point in their life can really make dramatic improvements on. Well, and I love that you said, let's repeat the definition again. So I got the first part, the will and the skill to see yourself clearly. So this idea of clarity matters too, right? Kind of an inward look for an outward result. First, the inward look. Okay. What was the second half of the definition? So seeing yourself clearly is like the overall heading. But then under that are two really important things. One is understanding who you are, which is self-awareness from the inside out. In other words, what do I value? How do I, you know, how do I want to be remembered? What are my aspirations? What do I want to achieve and experience in my life? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And at the same time, the second part is understanding how we're seen by others. And I refer to that as self-awareness from the outside in. Interesting data point. You might nerd out on this. I have a feeling you will. Those two types of self-knowledge are completely independent of each other. Oh, interesting. Okay. So what that means practically is that we might be high on one, you know, like internal self-awareness. I might love to journal, but my friends might think I'm a total jerk and I just have no idea. Or vice versa. I might be spending so much time focused on how other people see me that I'm not working for my own, you know, well-being and doing things in the spirit of my happiness and success. So practically, we all have to work on both. Well, I love this. I love the second part because normally I'm like, okay, who am I and why am I here? There's some great questions. I know you like to use the word what, right? You know, but I love that you flipped it to the second part is I could know all that as much as I could, and I could be very clear in my own mind and have no clue of how I'm coming across, right? And have no clue of how I'm really being perceived. In fact, just to be honest with you, lots of times my wife says, "You don't see me, you know, you're not seeing me," and I'm going, "Wow, I'm obviously not coming across the way I think I am." Right. So let's you're trying. You want to see her, right? Absolutely. Yeah. I'm trying very hard, you know, and trying to improve on that. And so let's go to that second part. How does one build, you know, the knowledge of how you're seen by others? What are some techniques to even find out like how I'm perceived by others? Let me give your listeners kind of two overall, you know, buckets of work that you could do. And by the way, everything that you're going to hear during this conversation is designed to be simple, practical, focused, and fast. So, the answer is not go to a therapist for 2 hours a week. If you want to, great. But the good news is that's not the only way to get to self-awareness. So to build your external self-awareness, the first bucket of work is learning how to move away from your own perspective so that you can adopt other people's perspective. So this is it's like an internal skill, but what all the research on this has shown is when we ask ourselves a question like, in the conversation with you and your wife, what would a neutral third party think about this interaction that we're having? That's actually called meta perception. And the research shows that when we engage in meta perception, as opposed to just thinking about ourselves from our perspective, we get closer to an accurate view, at least in terms of the way other people see us. We don't get all the way there, but we make a significant jump forward. So somebody, for example, that doesn't, is not quite ready to start asking for feedback, even a question like that, what would a neutral third party observe about me, about the conversation, about the other person, can get us, at least part of the way there.
Yeah, I know in meditation practice, I do a little bit of that. It's the watcher mind, right? It's the idea of watching yourself. So kind of third party view, if you can. How do we go about that in, let's say, a business relationship? Like, how would I go about it with my team? This
I
third
think
party
so.
view.
So it can be as simple as asking that question of
Yeah.
yourself, either, ideally in the moment, but even afterwards. Because if you ask yourself afterwards, it's in the spirit of, okay, what can I learn for the next time I'm with that group of people, or the next time I'm in that type of situation? But if you want to get even more detailed, you could, for example, before that meeting, you could sit down and say, okay, what are my goals? That's the internal piece. And then externally, how do I need to be showing up in order to connect with this group of people in a way that will, positively influence us to whatever we're trying to achieve? Something as simple as that, you could say, okay, if I imagine it from their standpoint, what would be most helpful? Examples would be like, let them talk. Let them ask questions. You ask questions. And what should I not do could be another thing. Like, don't interrupt people. Make sure I'm, talking less than half the time, or, whatever feels authentic based on the goals that you have. But I think that can be just, again, a really simple but high value exercise.
Well, I want to dive deeper because I love where you're going with this. I think back to preparation before we went flying. We were prepared, in the briefing to go flying. You actually visualized, and I don't know if visualization kicks in any of your science. You visualized the outcome that you're hoping to achieve, but you used the word feedback, which I think is the most important part of any kind of continuous improvement, whether it's self-aware or even process oriented from a team. Was, do we have feedback? Do we have a mechanism for feedback? And is that feedback in an environment that is safe, where you can get this truthful and honest third party view, right? And that was the secret of the Blue Angels. I don't know if you know that. The Glad to Be Here debrief was the secret of how we were able to continually improve and execute. So I love that you just brought up those points. What does it mean? What does feedback mean, the way I just kind of gave you a heads up? And how should I be thinking about feedback?
So first of all, I love that example. I'm very intrigued by that and want to learn more. Feedback is another camera angle of our behavior. That's the way I encourage people to think about it. The research on this shows that no one person has a complete perspective on who we are and how we're showing up. Our own self views are important. They matter. They have value. And we have to see how other people see us by getting feedback. So the metaphor I like to use, instead of seeing self-awareness as a mirror, and I look in the mirror and what I see is exactly, what I'm looking at, I like to think of it like a prism, right? Nice. So we all remember from middle school science class that when you shine a white light through one end of a prism, it comes out the other side as a beautiful rainbow. And every single person's perspective that you decide to seek out, and maybe we'll come back to that because that's important. Every single perspective is just a piece of the rainbow. But the more perspectives you have, the better of a view you have about like
Yeah.
the totality of who you are. And so we're going to talk about feedback, but I don't want anyone who's listening to think that their own self views are secondary to how other people see them. It really is. Like, there's an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that I just love that really fits this. He says, the definition of true intelligence is to hold two opposing ideas in our brains at the same time and retain the ability to function. And even the most self-aware people find situations where their view is different than other people's view.
Yeah.
And the work is actually wrestling with that. It's not saying like you're right or I'm right. It's saying we're all right. And now I get to make sense of that. And that might be kind of interesting.
Well, it's huge. First off, is that cognitive dissonance? Is that another way to think about holding two views? I'm not sure. I'm asking you.
So cognitive dissonance, this is like a technical, nerdy answer.
Okay.
In a sense, yes. But cognitive dissonance has to do with what we believe versus how we behave. So like I might believe A, but I'm doing B instead of A. And the idea is but I think it does go back to self-awareness, doesn't it? Because I might believe in one thing and find myself acting in a way that contradicts that, which might be, definitely an opportunity for some reflection.
Well, there's so many things that you just mentioned. This is only a few days after the elections, right? And I think one of the, not to get political because that's not what we're doing here, but the idea of being able to hold a different perspective, even be able to listen to somebody else's perspective, I think is so critical for our world today, and ourselves. So I know that's challenging. It's always challenging to hear somebody else's perspective, especially when we disagree with them, right? So how do you do that? How do you open up your lens? I love the idea of a prism and get different views, and at the same time, honor your own self view, but don't grasp to it. That's one thing I've heard. When I'm grasping to something, that's when I know I need to look at myself, right? Why am I so grasping, not at the other person? And I love the analogy is when you point a finger at somebody, three of them are pointing back at you, right? And so that's my internal mechanism that says anytime I'm saying something to someone else, I better realize where's it coming from. So that's just to open the seed. I know you're an expert at this. Where do you want to go with that? How does that tie into your research?
I could not agree more passionately, more fervently with what you just said about listening to each other, particularly in the context of politics. And I agree that's not what we're doing here, but it's just one really salient example that we're all seeing. I'll give you one example of something I've learned personally, because in my self-awareness journey, there have been many times that I didn't know something I thought I knew and then learned something. I had a friend who had literally the polar opposite views that I did politically on literally everything. And she was one of my closest friends.
That's great.
So that was during like 2 elections ago, right? So it was intense for both of us.
I bet.
But we ran towards it for the following reason. This was a person that I loved, that I respected, that I knew was intelligent, that I knew had good values. So the question I started to ask myself, even just to like chill, like you said, when I was getting triggered, was you might be wrong. What if you're wrong?
Right.
And of course, deep down, I knew I was right and not wrong. But if I could even entertain the thought, suddenly I became genuinely curious about like, wow, what made you believe that? Or like, what did you see that made you come to that conclusion? And what was so crazy was being able to do that and to converse from a place of respect and assuming mutual good intent, and that we have the same values, but we're just sort of using them differently, really led to some eye-opening conversations. And there are a couple places where she changed my mind, not a lot again, But I
Yeah.
think just to be open to that and to, maybe not get into those conversations with people where we can't say all those things that I said about my friend.
Yeah.
It just taught me a lot.
Well, one of the things that I like to talk about with the Blue Angel debrief, which tell me if works into your feedback, is the first I call it dynamic, is to have a safe environment, and that's respect, right? Just what you said.
Yes.
So even if we're going to have a successful debrief or feedback session, I've got to feel safe, and the way to feel safe is psychological safety, right? Not just the physical safety, but really the key is that respect the other individual. And you said that in your comments. What else are you finding? What does the research say are some of the fundamentals you need in order to have successful feedback?
So I would turn back to our research with highly self-aware people that didn't start out that way, because we
Okay.
knew they were doing something different. We knew that, if only 15% of us on a good day are self-aware, they must have been doing something different to get better feedback than even those of us who were getting feedback were getting. And
Nice.
what we discovered surprised me in a lot of ways. The first surprise came from how widely or not widely they cast the net. So I was
Mm.
expecting them to say things like, when some random person comes up to me and says, "Can I give you some feedback?" I enthusiastically say yes right away. That is not what they said. Almost all of them told us that they rely on about 3 to 5 people, very carefully chosen, which I'll come back to, in order to get regular feedback. But from those people, it doesn't mean that you might not get feedback from someone else, your boss, a random person, but that's even a place to run that feedback through is this core group of people. And we named them, and you'll see kind of why in a second. But there were 2 criteria someone had to meet to be the best feedback giver possible and to really be part of that small circle. The first goes back to what you were saying, which is you have to believe that person has your best interest at heart. They do not, however, have to be your best friend at work. They don't have to be your closest friends. Certainly your family, you would hope they have your best interest at heart, but this is more of I think, a gut decision. And we tried to ask some of them, how do you know that? And they would just say, well, when you know, you know. And if you have any question marks in your mind, maybe put that person aside just for the purposes of the exercise. So that's the first part. They have to be loving. The second part is, at the same time, you have to believe that that person is going to be ready, willing, and able to tell you the truth, especially when it's hard to hear. That one's a little trickier. So this is critics. So if you put those together, it's having loving critics. And when we first discovered this, I had a big epiphany. There were so few people in my life and my work that fit both of those criteria. For example, my mother, God love her. She is an uncritical lover. So I could send her, my latest book and have her read it. And she'd say, "Oh, honey, this is the best book I have ever read. I wouldn't change a thing." Which makes you feel really good, but it's not going to make my book better, right? But then on the other side, we have some people have workplace frenemies who would be happy to tell you all the things that you're doing wrong. But if it's not coming from a place of support and I'm going to tell you this in spite of how uncomfortable it is because I want you to be successful, that person's also not a good option. So that's why, part of that is, I think, why their circles were so small is how few people actually fit those criteria. And just one last thing.
Yeah.
I had never heard anyone talking about who to get feedback from. You think about both of our experience in the business world, there's a lot of feedback training, but most of it is, how do you ask for feedback? And that's important. But my opinion, based on this research that we've done and kind of what we found, is the single most important thing you can do to make sure you're getting really good but supportive feedback is to pick the right people.
Right. Man, that is so cool. I'm so glad because, again, I'm putting it through my lens on the Blue Angels. We carefully selected who was on the team, and then you earned the trust. We gave him trust, of course,
Mm,
but you earned the trust, and we knew that the purpose higher than self. So the mission, the shared value, was way more important than any one individual's opinion or position. So they became a critic that you could trust, right? That this person wasn't saying this to up themselves and put you down, or either one of those. It was to make the team better, right? To make the organization better.
yeah.
And that's, so I love your two, loving is important there, that they care, right? It's another word. But tell me the definition of a critic again. When is a critic um valuable? What do they need to be?
Yeah. So you always want to have both. It would be the argument I'd make. So loving and
Okay.
critics. But for a critic, let me give the definition and then kind of come back
Yes.
to a couple of
Because
examples of how you might know, right?
please, I didn't
So,
get it. It sounded great. By the way, whatever you said, and when I re-listen to this, I'm going to go, oh, she said it perfectly. But I want to make sure I get it in my heart, not my head. So
oh, I love
please.
that. Oh, I love that. It's all about getting it in your heart with self-awareness and with like anything too. So thank you for that. So it's someone who you are fairly confident, more than 50%, will tell you the truth despite how hard it is to
Wow.
tell you.
Wow.
Because let me just do a brief aside, because I
Yeah,
actually think this
please.
is really important. Um, we as humans are hardwired to stay mum, which means we're
Yeah.
hardwired from seeking feedback to some extent. And we're hardwired for either fibbing, withholding, or sometimes even lying when we're asked to give critical feedback. And at first that makes no sense, right? You're like, we're social creatures. How could this have happened? But if you think about it, several 100,000 years ago when humans were living together in groups of 100 to 150, if you did anything to upset the social apple cart, you were risking being voted off the island, to use a more modern term. And if that happened, the likelihood that you would survive was very low. So
Yeah.
that's the urge that we feel, both when we're asking for feedback and when we're giving feedback to people. And I say that because hopefully it will at least explain why we feel that way and outline that we can make a different decision. Just because your gut is telling you this is scary and bad
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean that's actually true, right? So going back to the critics piece,
Yeah.
here's how to tell if somebody can do this for you. The easiest way is if they've given you feedback in the past before, or in the past period. That was redundant. And sometimes that has happened and it becomes pretty easy. But if
Yeah.
you haven't seen them do that, it doesn't mean they're not going to be a good loving critic. You can
Hmm.
also look at how they interact with people in general. We've all we've all been friends with the person who will say the one thing that everybody else is afraid to say. Or, in the meeting, like the group is going down a path and they're like, excuse me, what about this elephant in this room, like sitting next to me that we haven't
Yeah.
talked about?
Yeah.
And that's, as soon as you think about it that way, most people can think of several people that fit that umbrella. So that would be my guidance is ideally it's someone who's given feedback to you, but it just needs to be someone who's brave enough to speak up.
Wow. And then I think I heard you say you have to trust their judgment, right? Or that they're knowledgeable.
Yes,
Did you say that? Because it's like
I
not a
didn't,
random
but yeah,
person.
that's like the third thing.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
and I like to try to keep it simple. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes we lose the nuance, but I'm glad you brought that up because it's actually pretty important. I would never ask, my friend who doesn't like to read for feedback on my book, not because she's not a loving critic, but because if that's not something that she does and she doesn't have anything to compare it to, or, whatever, she just might not be coming from a place where her feedback is anchored in the bigger picture. But I would ask, my best friend who's a lawyer, who's a voracious reader, and who has sort of been through this whole journey of being an author for as long as I have with me. Even better than that is to ask other writers. So there's kind of like, for anything, first of all, the person has to be exposed to that behavior. So all of those people would have to be willing to read a draft of something. Second of all, they need to have a little bit of a context, but then ideally they're, if not an expert, they're knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah.
And that has to do less with like them being willing to give you feedback and more the value of the feedback that they're giving you.
Wow. Hey, so I think I'm going to remember, loving critic that you trust. I'm just going to add that you trust, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's awesome. I can't wait to dive into your book. By the way, this book we're talking about is Insight, correct? Is that the book you're referencing?
Correct.
Okay.
And for anyone watching, it's right, very, very subtly placed
exactly
on the left side of your screen.
Why'd you pick light blue? I love it, by the way. And next to it, it's in yellow, right? Is that Insight also? Is that? Tell me why.
Yeah. So my my publisher for Insight is Penguin Random House, and they have fantastic designers. So the beauty is, like, I'm not great at design, so they gave us options. So we kind of settled on that blue, and I just thought, I don't know, I love it. It's sort of calming, because you don't want a book about self-awareness to be red or orange or something. You want it to be like, okay, I feel calm, I can do this.
Hey, but
and then
you got a bunch of red books on the other side, which maybe is that your research book? I don't know, books on research or what?
Well, the funny thing here, wait, let me see if I can show you this.
Oh, nice. Look at your bookshelf.
There's a lot
researcher
here. So part of it is just, what books do I like that are red?
Yeah. It looks great. Those of you who are watching on YouTube can see the backdrop looks great. And I love that, there was a credibility check. I mean, there's your library of books is incredible, right? And your research. Let's dive. And so the light blue and gold, by the way, is very close to my backdrop, the blue and gold or the Blue Angels. Yours is actually prettier. It's lighter. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And it's also the colors on my book, but I went a little bit darker on the blue, just more on the blues. But anyhow, let's talk about applying what we just talked about, because I think this is super critical in the business setting first, right? So let's say someone's listening to this, and a lot of our people, are business leaders, and they want to have good feedback in their teams, but they might not know how. So can we dive into a little bit of the how? How do you teach people to get effective feedback or debrief?
This is something I'm really passionate about, especially the higher up you go in organizations. There's a quote that I love by another management thinker who says that most leaders, especially senior leaders, are surrounded by walls, mirrors, and liars.
Whoa, that should get your attention.
When I'm doing like speeches and stuff, and I say that to a group of senior executives, you can hear the air go out of the room. Now, of course, that doesn't have to be the case, which is, why we're talking about this, but that's the default state. And there's also a lot of evidence that shows that the higher up you get on the ladder of organizations, the less self-aware you tend to be.
Whoa.
And that's it's uncomfortable.
The higher
up you rise, the less self-aware you tend to be.
So that's contradictory to my thoughts. I would be one of those leaders that would hopefully think a self-aware leader would rise up, but you're saying that it doesn't work that way, huh? In your research.
Let me tell you, let me give you the reasons. I think the reasons might be, they helped me get my head around this when I first started to look into all of this. Successful people, when they're rewarded for doing what they're doing, they begin to evolve this sort of assumption that's usually not even conscious of, well, what I've done has gotten me this far. Like, I probably shouldn't reinvent the wheel. I should stick with what I'm doing. A second reason is logistically, there are fewer people above you, right? When you're in the CEO chair, pretty much all you have of people who, are likely to be able to tell you the truth is your board.
Mhm.
If you're if you're reporting to the CEO, it's the CEO. And so I think that's another just really practical reason that
Okay.
senior leaders get less feedback. And then the third reason is, what we would all imagine, which is if you ask people who report to you or who are, in your organization closer to the front lines, they might find it career limiting, and
Mm.
they will probably not be immediately honest with you. And so if you put that all together, most of these people are not starting out any less self-aware than anyone else.
Mhm.
But it also means that it's a competitive advantage.
Oh,
When I
good.
work with my
Right.
clients, I say, listen, this is not for the faint of heart, especially my coaching process. It is not for the faint of heart. You're going to drink through a fire hose and it's going to feel like a fire walk. But
Mm.
the fact that you're doing it puts you above, almost everyone out there already, let alone when you start to decide what you want to work on and what you want to change. So that would sort of be the framing that I'd put this under, is it's a scary reality, but it's also
Mhm.
something that can differentiate you, whatever level leader you're at.
I love, and I'll
Yeah.
give you again another um, example in my life, and I keep going back to the blues because it's so unique. It's the best of the best, and it was actually very unique on how we did things. Was our fighter pilot? Did we do this in the Navy? And, Top Gun, all those things you've seen, right? Did you see the movie Top Gun, the new one, Top Gun Maverick?
No, the new one I haven't yet, but we actually
Uh,
just got it. It's
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. Oh, you got it? Yeah, exactly. So you'll watch it. But the idea of feedback in that movie is a little bit harsher. It's actually not that way in the real world, in the real Navy. All
Mm,
right. Hollywood likes to throw that piece in, but the concept is critical, and that is, that we want to know what went well. We want to know, more importantly, what didn't go well. But here's where it gets really nuanced: is I want to know the decision process behind it. I want to know where those inflection points are so that we can go do better. We call them, instead of goods and bads, we call them goods and others. Okay. But
goods
we
and others. I
definitely,
love that.
and we focus on the others. And it kind of goes back to your idea of maybe how we're wired, for thousands of years, is the others will get you hurt. I mean, I do want to reinforce the goods, absolutely. But I really want to fix the others, right? So that we can move on. And that's not just flying, that's in business. And I think where I want to steer this back to is, so the Blue Angel debrief is a perfect example of what you're talking about. It is a competitive advantage, right? And being self-aware and having a process that everybody, not just yourself, but that the team awareness comes in, becomes a huge advantage in the business world. So let's keep diving down this, because you've studied it. So how does one do that? I'm intrigued now. Okay, how do I do it if I'm a leader listening to this?
So there's sort of two phases of the process once you decide that you want to get better feedback and be in charge of your own destiny, right?
Nice.
Not letting other people make choices for you, but having the information and deciding. The first stage, ideally, is going to be, like I mentioned before, some kind of fire hose of feedback. So
Okay.
what I do when I'm working with my clients, I just started working with a new client right now who's a CEO. I'm interviewing 45 people
Mm.
at his company, former employees, clients, his family, his friends, to get a picture of how he's showing up.
Oh,
And I think
nice.
that's really important to start out, because what you're doing is you're saying, what's the entire universe of perceptions in the in the stakeholders that are most important for my success, that I need to lead well, that I need to influence well, and that we need to build trust and relationships with. And from there, the suggestion I would give is, don't try to boil the ocean. I work with my clients to pick one behavior, one at a time. And it can be a big behavior. It can be something like, you know, uh, to prepare for my exit strategy from this company, I need to build a group of leaders below me who can run the company without me, right? So it can be big, but it's only one thing.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that you can't work on other things after you've gotten some traction. But
Okay.
what I've found is doing any more than that is a recipe for disappointment and overwhelm. For any
Okay.
leader, especially senior level leaders. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the transition or the bridge. And then
Okay.
it goes into the second part of saying, what are my goals? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to work on? I
Hmm.
think about one CEO I coached several years ago. Her biggest goal was to work on the relationship she had with her board. And
Hmm.
so it was basically, so then she said, okay, who are my key stakeholders? They're my board members. And it's not enough for me to change. I've got to continue to get constant feedback from them to make sure that they see I'm changing and that I'm changing in a way that serves what my goal is. So the process I teach my clients, and this is backed up by quite a bit of research, is 5-minute conversations once a month with 8 to 10 key stakeholders. Any more than that, it's not manageable. Any less than that, and you're not getting the full benefit, because part of the benefit is talking about it, is saying, hey,
Hmm.
remember, I'm trying to build a better relationship with you. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? You have been doing that, right? So it's like the PR aspect.
Hmm.
And so the conversation is as follows. As you know, I've been trying to work on my time management skills as a COO. Number one, what feedback do you have for me in the last 30 days? And then you listen, and then you say, what?
Well, what else can I do? I mean,
2 words.
uh,
You say,
loving critic. I want a loving critic. I don't know.
that's
You
good.
tell me.
You say, okay,
I'm glad you're
4 words.
testing.
Thank you, loving critic.
Okay. Yeah, there
Right?
you go. Okay.
It's it is an amazing magical tool that makes feedback conversations less than 5 minutes. I mean, clarify if you need to clarify, but
Yeah.
usually it's pretty clear and you say thank you. Second question is, what ideas do you have for me in the next
Yeah.
30 days?
I like that.
And then again, you say thank you. And then if you get into that cadence, I'm not going to say it's easy at first. It can feel really uncomfortable, but practice it. Practice it in front of the mirror. And once you get into that rhythm, people are like banging down your door with, oh my God, you just nailed that. Or, I found something that I wanted to make sure you knew about. Then it actually becomes this like positive collective bonding experience when they're really committed to it. So I think it's that first
Like
part of the fire hose to get the whole known universe. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. But then 2 is hold yourself to the commitment to keep those conversations going.
oh, I love it. And by the way, the fire hose, I think I love your example about um, an individual, but I think this works with clients too, right? You want to know what are the
Hmm.
clients thinking. So interview
Absolutely.
45 clients and ask them, how are we coming across, right? And we're in that process even currently, to understand not what we think we're presenting, more importantly, what is the client getting out of it, right? Like, why are they hiring us? So, but I loved your 2 questions, especially the idea of what ideas do you have for me? Because what was the first question? Because I want to make sure I ask this of people. It's
Hmm.
something
So
to the
yeah, so
effect of,
you,
yeah.
no, go ahead.
Well, let's see how well I was listening. See if I was listening, right? I like this. Is you were asking, you made a commitment to somebody to, let's say, time management, and you asked the how question. How am I doing with regard to XYZ? That's what I took back. I'm not sure I heard exactly the question. And then the
No,
second
it's
question
definitely
was,
on the right path.
yeah,
So
what,
it's
what do you,
basically the 2 questions are, the first question is, in the last 30 days, what have you
okay,
seen? And that gives
okay,
them a chance to give you both, positive and constructive feedback,
yeah,
or other feedback, good and other feedback. And then the
yeah,
second question is what you just said, in the next 30 days, what ideas do you have? And
yeah, okay,
both of those, like you can't ask one of those questions without asking the other, in my opinion.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
related, but they're very different questions.
Okay, I love where you're going. So this is what I do when I get off stage and I interact with, my audience. I do ask them 2 things. First, I want to know what's working. And what I've learned is to use this word, what resonated with you? And for some reason, yeah, I mean, hopefully this helps you or anybody, right? It opens up the idea, it's so the second question, because then I want you to give me some feedback and see if we can help this, because I trust you as a loving critic, right? Okay. Is the second one is then what could I do better, or what could I have done better? But I think that you gave me a little nuance in questions that would even be better. So debrief me, give me some feedback on those questions, and how would you adjust it if I want feedback from a presentation? And this is real time with anybody, could be anybody.
I love your first question. I'm going to totally crib that. What I
Good.
love about the word resonates, and probably what you do too, is it's not a value judgment. It's about them and not
Hmm.
you, right? And it's also not making them feel obligated. Like if you said, like, what did you like, it's
Right.
not making them feel obligated to make up things just so you have something that they liked. They can say, like I could see somebody being willing to answer the what resonated question with a lot more clarity and just less stress. So I just love that. I think on the second question, the opportunity is mostly just to hedge your risk. Because they're going to be, I mean, you and I know this, right? Like event planners, they're not usually super shy about their opinion about us as speakers. But,
Yeah.
maybe it's a company that doesn't work with a lot of professional speakers, or, an audience member or something, and you would love to hear their opinion. Instead of saying it was, what could I do better? Right? Was that
Right. Right.
instead of, I might think about making it future focused. So
Hmm.
what ideas do you have for me for the next presentation?
Yep.
And the reason I think that's an important distinction is, you know, it's not needed for everyone, but it will take away the fear in people who might feel hesitant to give you like some gold feedback.
Yeah, you know what? I love that. Actually, that's what I wrote down. What ideas do you have for me is much better to me than what could I've done better? Because usually what I get is nothing, and I'm not saying that because I'm doing a great job. People typically they're not coming up to tell you that, right? I wish they would. And so what I want to do is I want to find that nuance, right, where
Hmm.
somebody feels comfortable enough to at least give you an answer. Because rarely, I'm talking like 1 in 20 give you something to the better. But I would think if I use the word ideas, or if you use the word ideas, what ideas have for me? That doesn't mean better. It's just, hey, you could go here, you could do this, right? I think it's going to
Totally.
really open it up.
Yeah, because it doesn't assume in the question that what you were doing was wrong. It
Right.
just assumes that they have a unique perspective and can give you some ideas. Like another thing, if you're pressed for time, might even be, if you could give me one piece of advice, big or small, for my next presentation, like to
Oh,
make
that's a
that
nice
the
one.
best that it could possibly be, what would it be?
That's a good one too. Yeah, that's a good one too. Nice. So, about I want to make sure I'm looking at our time. I could talk to you forever because there's
I
so
know,
many good
vice
things.
versa.
Yeah, there's so many good connections here. But I want to kind of make sure you mentioned earlier. Let's go back to that if you want. I think it had to do with perceptions, and I want to make sure we cover anything you want to talk about there. And then I want to open it up to you and say, from the audience standpoint, your research to me is so interesting, and I think we could unpack a little bit more on the research. So that would be my suggestion of where we go from here. But over to you. How can this be best for you?
Let's do it. I,
Okay,
I'm I'm struggling. This is my post-COVID brain. I'm
good.
struggling to remember what else I wanted to say on perspective. So I
Yeah, I
wonder
think
if
we hit it.
maybe we want to. Yeah, I feel like I said everything that
Yeah,
I would normally say in service of your audience and helping them be their best and do their
yeah,
best. So maybe what can we talk about with the research? I'm game.
yeah. Give me some good research on this stuff. What excites you? What would excite the audience? What have you learned?
So, oh gosh. Well, the biggest thing, we've sort of mentioned is that almost everyone thinks they're self-aware, and
And we're
very
not.
few people actually are.
I think you had the stats. Like Greg on my team, we call him Sugar, came up and gave me some prep. Because we're always prep for these. He said, and tell me if this is right. 80% people think they're self-aware, but only 15% are. What are the real numbers? What do you think?
95% of people believe that they're self-aware
Okay.
versus 10 to 15% that actually meet those criteria.
Wow.
I was stunned. I thought the first number was going to be high, but I didn't think it would be almost 100%.
Okay, so that's a great stat. And now what do you do with that information? Well, maybe a couple questions go in my mind.
Yeah.
Why is that? Could be a question, but I think more importantly, what do we do with that? How do we change that? If you care, and I do.
So the reason those numbers are what they are, it's kind of a good summary of our conversation, right? There are so many things that are built in to both us and our social world and our culture, no matter where we are in the world, that almost stack the decks against our self-awareness. Because at
Mm.
first I thought, wow, 10 to 15%, is that all? And this is over, multiple studies. But when you think about it that way, it's not that we're doing anything wrong, especially people who are following the common wisdom around self-awareness and
Mm.
then, making mistakes that we don't even know we're making because we don't know the common wisdom is wrong. But what I get practically from that is a couple things. I think first, we are literally all on this journey, or we all should be on this journey, and we are whether or not we know it, right? And
Mhm.
there's almost an acknowledgement of that. It's not bad. I almost have no value judgment about people who have a lot of room to improve because it's an incredibly learnable skill. Wherever they start out is where they start out. It's okay. The only thing that's not okay is to just ignore, working on your self-awareness. Anything that you do to move in the right direction is going to put you above, most people already. But then I
Mhm.
think the second thing is it shouldn't lead to us being preoccupied with exactly what our level of self-awareness is. It can be helpful. And our team has an assessment and, there's certainly ways that you can assess your self-awareness. What that 10 to 15% actually do very differently is they're confident in what they've learned so far, not overly so, but they say, this is what I know. But they look at it almost like exploring space, where the fun part, the cool part is actually how much there still is to know in addition to
Mm.
what we already know. And if we can all have that mindset of just curiosity, no matter what I know, I can always learn something that's going to give me power, control, success that I didn't know before. So that's sort of how I'd frame that practically for all of us. It should definitely not lead us like to run for the hills and say, it's not worth it. I'm never even going to try. It's actually quite the opposite.
Well, I love what you said in the idea of, I think, being curious is part of this continuous improvement process of, I want to get a little bit better, or I just want to do a better job for somebody. I want to be a better partner, want to be a better presenter, I want to, be a better leader, whatever words you want to put in there. And I find that just doing small things, small incremental things, can make a big difference over time, right? So it's like you said, I'm curious for that one little nugget, that one little word, that one little sentence.
Yeah.
Like today, we came up with a way of asking the question, what ideas do you have for me, versus how could it be better? Or you like the word resonating, what resonated with you? And sometimes just little things like that can make a huge difference. Are there some little ones that come to your mind right now that over time, with all your practices, all your coaching and training, have really made a big difference for people? What are they?
Yes. And let me just address what you said, because what you said is really important. There's basically three overall categories of things that help us become more self-aware. One of them is we call earthquake events, which is like, my spouse left me, or I got fired from my job. The second is new roles and rules. So this is, I'm in a new job, I went off to college, whatever. The third category we named everyday insights.
Hmm.
And most people, if you ask, like, out of those three things, which is the most common way of making dramatic improvements in your self-awareness, they would pick 1 or maybe
Yeah.
2.
Right.
The actual
Right.
answer is 3,
Wow.
which
What
again
what do
is
you
like,
mean?
it makes it so much more accessible. If I know that the most self-aware people, that we could find who didn't start out that way, didn't do it through waking up one day and all of a sudden realizing something. They did it
Mm,
by having a commitment to take small steps every day. So I always tell people it's like baby steps. Remember, the What About Bob movie with the baby steps, and that's
yeah.
exactly what this journey is. And
Yeah.
we might not have time for a mindfulness meditation retreat for an entire weekend, but we have time for, let me give you a tool as an example, the daily check-in. The daily
Yes.
check-in is, it's very similar to a couple things I heard you say, but it's also what we found in our research that the most self-aware people do. When you're getting ready to like turn in at the end of the night, you're brushing your teeth, you're finishing your reading at your nightstand, just ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, what went well today?
Yes.
Number 2, what didn't go so well? And then the key, number 3, how can I be smarter tomorrow?
Oh, nice. How can
And
I
what I
be
love about
smarter
this,
tomorrow? Yeah.
yeah, is it doesn't even allow us to kick ourselves down the rabbit hole of overanalyzing ourselves or ruminating. It's just very like tick, tick, tick. And it gives us one thing to try the next day. And the fewer the list, in my experience, the greater the likelihood of success. So 1 is a good number.
Oh, I love that. I do a gratitude practice that is very similar. There's basically three questions. It starts with the what went well, or what are you grateful for today, and then I just go back to yesterday and say what happened yesterday, and then I go
Mm.
forward in my day and say what can think of others, not just yourself. But it goes into that what you just said. It's what could I do smarter, right? Or what can I do today? It's planning intention into your day on not only gratitude, but in this case, this idea of self-awareness. Now, your research showed that the people who are in that 10 or 15% that are self-aware, why is that important to be self-aware? Do they?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
go for it.
So more research coming at you, and I'll just
Good.
give you literally like 5% because we'd be here for forever otherwise. People who are self-aware are more successful at work. They get more promotions. They're more confident. They're better communicators. They're more empathetic. They have better sales numbers. They are more effective and respected leaders. And there's some pretty compelling evidence out there that companies with large numbers of self-aware employees are more profitable. So this is not a nice to have. This is not a soft, fluffy skill. This is a competitive advantage, both personally at the team level and organizationally. But wait, there's more. At home, people who are self-aware experience better, romantic relationships, better friendships. They feel more meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. And then last, but certainly not least, anyone who's listening to this who has kids, particularly teenage kids, will be thrilled to know that if you're self-aware as a parent, you tend to raise more mature, less narcissistic children.
Wow. So I think now everyone's got to not only re-listen to this podcast, but go out and get your book. All right, on insights, because those
I mean, if they
those
want to make that decision, it's not the wrong one for sure.
yeah, I love it. I love it. Hey, also, give me the business reasons again first on self awareness. Uh, uh, I'm trying to understand them. So, what were they again? Why is it important to be self aware
So
professionally?
usually I pick a random assortment. So tell me if anything feels like it wasn't what I said, just tell me.
That
But
was
so
good.
one is work performance,
Yep. Okay.
promotions.
Mhm.
I think I talked about being more confident,
Yes.
better communicators, better
Okay.
relationships, better sales outcomes, which
Mhm.
makes sense, right? When you think about it,
Yeah.
more
Understand.
effective leaders who, when you as the leader turn around, there are actually people behind you instead of like a vast open space. And then at the organizational level, so I'll just tell you the study that I was referencing. They
Yeah,
looked
please.
at several hundred publicly traded companies in, I believe it was North America. And they found that the companies with the poorest returns were 79% more likely to have large numbers of unaware employees. So then by that same token, right, more self-awareness was related to more profitability.
Wow, that's great. What study was this? Do you
Oh
remember?
gosh, it's only been 6 years since I've read it, but it's in
Okay.
the index for Insight. I can definitely find it for you.
Oh no, that's great. I'm gonna buy the book. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna buy it and read it.
Yes,
That's
if
more
anyone
important.
is listening to this and is a research nerd like we are, there's an extensive bibliography, so you could keep yourself busy for a lifetime, I think, with all the additional resources that we put in there.
That's so powerful. And I think for me, there's always a personal reason to be self-aware, but I like it when you can have both professional and personal reasons to do this, right? And and I'm glad that the studies say it, right? So it's just not a feel-good thing, because it's not. Like you
Oh,
said,
totally.
this is real. Yeah, and it makes a difference. It made a difference on flying. The tightest reason the Blue Angels can fly close together and lower the ground than any other team in the world. It's mostly because not only of our processes, of course, we had great processes, but self-awareness and team awareness was another thing that I dived into a lot. Team piece, right? Are you aware of others, and how do you pick someone up, when they're not feeling great? Has your research dove into any of the team awareness benefits or anything like that?
I am so passionate about this. Probably the most powerful example I can give you. Well, first of all, let me give you sort of what we've learned, and then I'll tell you a quick story. I'm sure you know of the story, but maybe it's new for some of your listeners. The 3 building blocks of self-aware teams are: number one, foundationally, a leader who models the way. The team can only be as self-aware and, I would say, successful as the leader is self-aware.
Okay.
The second is the safety and expectation to tell the truth. So that goes a little bit beyond some of the common conversation about, psychological safety is hugely important, but it has to go beyond that to be an expectation to tell the truth that's
Nice.
rewarded, right? And then the
Nice.
third is an ongoing process to stay self-aware.
Hmm.
It is not enough for a leader, for a team, for an organization to say, oh, well, I did a 360, or we had this meeting where we went over all these metrics. Like, we're good for now. So the story that I love to tell that really brings all of those together is the story of Alan Mulally, who saved Ford from basically going out of business, essentially. He came to the company in 2006, and his whole, what he knows in his blood, and I know he's one of my mentors and dear friends, and what he has always known in his blood is, first of all, you've got to love people up. Second of all, the truth will set us free. And then third, the CEO can't know everything. And he, there's a whole bunch of examples I could give, but just to keep it like a little bit focused, he really made that clear in his first, several weeks as the new CEO. And he was having to transform a culture that was secretive, resistant to change. Information was hoarded instead of shared. It was, according to Bill Ford, it was, they had a lot of work to do, and they knew that they couldn't do it with who they had. So that's why they brought in Alan. And what Alan did is he modeled the way by, for example, when a reporter asked him what kind of a car he drove in his first, couple weeks there, he said, well, I drive a Lexus. It's the finest car in the world.
Oh, wow. So that
Modeling the way.
surprised me. Yeah, modeling
Right?
way. No, saying I want to be like this, not where we are. Okay, I get you now.
Yeah.
Modeling the way. Okay.
And it's modeling the way, I think, first of telling the truth. But
I
then the other
see.
side of it, the first time I met Alan, I flew down to Arizona where he was at the time. And we did this really extensive interview. And at the end, he asked me, right? I'm this like peon author. This was 10 years ago. He asked me, how I could give him feedback on the interview. Like,
Nice.
how did I do? What ideas do you have for me? And it was just, he really is the real deal. He really walks the walk of modeling the way. The second
Yeah.
thing he did was he created the safety to tell the truth. And they instituted these weekly meetings called the Business Process Review. And in that, they reviewed 320 metrics that dictated, the success of the company, and kept telling them over and over, guys, I want you to bring the bad news. And I'm even going to we're going to color code the metrics so that green means it's on track, yellow means there are potential problems, and then red means there are definite problems. I want to see red and yellow. There is no consequence for speaking up. In fact, I will exalt you. But for several weeks and months, every slide that every executive presented in every meeting was green. And finally, he said, I can't take this anymore. Unless our plan is to lose $17 billion this year, I'm pretty sure it's not green. Right? But none of them knew what was going to happen. What was going to happen to the first person to put a red slide up there? And they soon found out. One of their executives was having a pretty major problem with a vehicle launch. And when the red slide went up, the air went out of the room, and everybody looked at Alan to see what he was going to do. But instead of, sending in 2 large men to take this executive away and never to be heard from again, he applauded. And he said, thank you. Oh, thank you. This is great visibility. How can we help him?
Right.
And Alan remembers thinking, at that moment, he had started turning around Ford. So they get there the next week. What do they see? More green slides,
Okay.
green slides, green slides. But that day, something was different. Not only had that executive with the red slide not been fired, he was sitting right next to Alan. Alan was asking for his feedback, complimenting him, really kind of making him like the star of the meeting. And that's what I mean when I say the safety and expectation to tell the truth.
Yes.
What do you do when your team brings you a metaphorical red slide? And then before that, how do you create the expectation that that's what you want to hear? And then the third thing, the ongoing process was that meeting. And Alan would say, hey, if we have an issue, it's okay, because we'll be here next week and the week after that and the week after that. And after that second meeting that I mentioned, it was a beautiful rainbow. And they worked together to turn the slides from red to yellow to green. And you probably know this again, but 5 years later, Ford had a $20 billion profit. They were the only one of the big 3 automakers that didn't need government bailout assistance. And he had 92% employee engagement.
Wow. Actually, I did not know all those stats. I'm glad you went over those with me, but I'm really glad that the team awareness piece is, you got to model what you want to be, right? The leader. I think of Gandhi, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. I'm glad that came out number 1. I really like that you stressed expectation, because it's not enough to have a safe environment, and I really think that's something I'm going to work on with my team and the people I work with. That's what was true on the Blues. It was expected. No one had to tell you. I mean, it's like, my God, and the same thing with the Naval Academy. You have to tell the truth because that's what's expected, right? And you can be accountable. It's not that anything. I mean, accountability is not a bad thing, right? Like you were saying. I mean, the idea of helping people who have the challenges, right? But that process improvement, and I love that you had the weekly meeting example. But he had 300 metrics. We're trying to get our team down to just 3 metrics each, but having metrics that you can go over every week, boom, that are meaningful, that tell a story, right? Not just get a check in the block, right? So I love what you just did. That's exactly what we're implementing. I didn't realize it came from Alan. What was you told me he said three things, and I actually didn't catch the first one because I wasn't paying attention. To be honest with you, I was the one I was thinking about one of your other statements you made. So I get that truth will set you free. CEO can't know
Mhm,
everything. What was his first piece?
mhm.
What was that? What was it?
What was the first piece? So the truth will set you free. The CEO can't know everything. Oh, and love them up.
Love them up.
So he
Was
was raised by
was
a
that the
mom
first
and a
one?
dad. Yep, love them up was the first one.
Oh, okay. Hey, go ahead. Tell me the
And
story
that's
then.
like, so he's an engineer. So it's,
Yeah.
first of all, it's very weird to hear people say that in the workplace in general, let
Yeah. Yeah.
alone from, an engineer, albeit who's, the most wonderful person you'll ever meet. But he shows that in everything that he does by
Wow.
respecting his colleagues, by encouraging them, by listening to them. He would dress up in plain clothes and go wander around Ford dealerships and thank the customers for being there and ask them questions. And they had a big event at Ford Field where they invited all of their suppliers. This was like tens of thousands of people, and their executive team was kind of in the middle of the stadium, and they yelled out, per Alan's suggestion, "We love you." And it wasn't enough to just say it, but one of the suppliers was interviewed and he said, "I knew at that moment that we were in a new era of Ford under Alan
Wow.
Mulally's leadership." So the power of love, like just loving people
Yeah.
and treating them with kindness and respect and compassion, it's everything.
Well, that's you just nailed the glad to be here. That's to me is what glad to be here means to organizations and individuals to be really grateful and take care of people. Wow. Okay. I do have two more questions. I was going to cut it off, but I'm not because there's too much good stuff. How does
You're the boss.
mindfulness? You know, thank no, you are. I'm learning from you. What is mindfulness? How does that play into the idea of self awareness? Another word that's out there a lot now.
So mindfulness is, and this is Ellen Langer's definition. She's one of the pioneers of researching mindfulness in the West. Is basically understanding your present moment without judgment. Another way she talks about it is noticing new things.
Hmm.
Mindfulness and self-awareness are very related.
Hmm.
Um, People who practice mindfulness tend to be more self-aware, and people who are
Hmm.
self-aware tend to practice mindfulness. The way I talk about the relationship between them is mindfulness is a necessary but not sufficient condition to be
Oh,
self-aware,
that makes sense.
right? Because like you have to think about more than just the present moment that you're in. You want to think about the future. You want to think about how your past experiences have informed you,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so sometimes we have to go a little deeper, quote unquote. But I think mindfulness is the cure for a lot of what ails us today in society in general.
Oh, tell me why. Why is it the cure?
I was once about to board an airplane, and there were like 50 or 60 people in line, and I looked across the line. Every single person was on their phone, including
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Good. Be honest. Yep.
Right. And so, oh yeah, I'm totally part of that problem. I work really hard, but not always successfully.
Yeah.
But not even noticing what's happening around us. Granted, the airport is not a place that full of like wonder and amazement, but maybe instead of that, you like you take a body scan and say, how am I feeling right now? So I can notice that. Or maybe there are cute little children playing over there, and I can look at them and feel some joy. But I think, Ellen Langer calls it mindlessness.
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be the default that we have. So anything we can do to just notice what's happening, it helps our brain, all this, but it helps our brains be more rational, and it helps us be more thoughtful and in control.
Well, I love that, it's always the present moment, right? Understand the present moment, but she puts in without judgment. Is that the idea? I was trying to
Yeah.
listen to what you said.
It's basically, and that's not word for word, I apologize,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's basically without reacting to or judging what the present moment is,
Oh,
right?
reacting also. Yeah, yeah. It's like that watcher mind again, that we were talking about. Um,
Very
and
much. Yeah.
okay, love that. Love that it also is necessary but not sufficient for self awareness. Because I agree with you that self awareness is a more embracing tool, right? Because it takes the past and hopefully the future into consideration. Kind of like empathy and compassion. This idea of being empathetic is a necessary part of compassion, but you also have to know what to do with it, right? It's not enough just to
Yeah.
feel somebody. Um, okay, I know you got a new book coming out. We can't talk about it too deep, but the concept I want to get out there because it's such a powerful concept that we're all going through right now. And that's the concept of resilience. So, what would you like to share with our audience so that they can be thirsty to buy your book when it comes out? What are you finding on
In
resilience?
2025, right?
Is it that
Thank you
long
for
going to be?
asking that question.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of this was from my own personal experience, but also from a sort of pandemic related research project I started, where I started out by interviewing people about bad things that happened to them and how did they respond, what tools did they use, how did they work. And I started, as we started to analyze the data, I kept finding something that made absolutely no sense, which was that their level of resilience had no predictive power for ultimately how they were able to not just bounce back from that bad thing, but to, maybe even grow forward. That was very confusing to me. I'm a lifelong student of resilience. I have built my entire life around resilience. I'm a fourth generation entrepreneur. My great grandfather came to the US from Germany with literally like change in his pocket. And he was able to buy a farm and live the American dream. And, so for me, grit, resilience, mental toughness was always the answer to tough things. And I would include in that everything from crises to challenges to even just change, the hyper change that we're experiencing.
Mhm.
So what I was able to stumble upon, and what I'm going to have to be a little, cagey about, is not necessarily a replacement for resilience and a lot of like kind of interesting findings on resilience itself, but an alternative.
Mm.
How can we maybe, especially people who have found that resilience isn't helping them as much as it used to, how can we
Mhm.
thrive in a world where the baseline level of stress and demands and change seems to just keep rising? It's higher than it was in past years, but that's
Mhm.
I'm writing. I started writing the book first for myself to figure it out because I was going
Yes.
through that. Um, but yeah, the goal is to kind of have a new companion for resilience to help us become unbreakable.
Oh, sounds like a title. I don't know.
I
Become
mean, maybe, I
unbreakable.
don't know. I can neither
Yeah, you're
confirm nor
still.
deny that.
I got you. No, I got you. Wow. And any so it's going to involve um, not necessarily the definition of resilience, but you think a companion that with resilience can really help a lot of people. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Mhm. Yes, and to challenge a little bit of the dominant
Yeah.
thinking around resilience. A lot of what the research shows is actually quite misunderstood. And I
Okay.
think, that happens when we're translating from science to the real world. So it's fascinating. I'm a little biased, but I think it's fascinating.
Oh, I can't wait. We're gonna have to stay in touch, and I can't wait to hear that. As I like to wrap up most of these with two questions. One is if there's something you want to share with people, you've learned a lot through your research, but not just your research, through your life, right? What would it be? Are there any certain sayings, any certain mantras, any certain things that you live your life by that you just want to share with us right now? What would want to be?
So I'll give you two.
Please.
One is how to live in this world, and two is what I try to do when I wake up every day. How to live in
Nice.
this world is whenever I'm getting down on myself, I ask, would I say to someone I love and respect what I just said to myself about myself?
Mm, powerful question.
And then the second, very simple, my number one value and purpose for existence is to make, well, let me actually say this in a slightly better way even. This is from my friend Marshall Goldsmith. The purpose of life is to make a positive difference and not to prove how smart we are and how right we are.
Mm. How do you know Marshall? What is, you said personal friend? I love, that's a beautiful quote.
He's my adopted dad. I already have 3 with step parents and father-in-law, but he's actually, we've been friends since probably like the early 2010s. And he is, one thing I just love about him is he's constantly challenging himself to improve and to evolve. You think about every book he's written. For anyone who hasn't read any of Marshall's work, like I would frankly buy that before I bought my book, just because
Oh, that's
it's so
beautiful.
amazing. But yeah, he is such a gift, not just to the world, but to all the people that are lucky enough to know him.
Well, what was his definition again about the purpose in life is to make an impact without something?
So this is like his interpretation of what he got from his mentor, Peter Drucker. The
Okay.
purpose of life, or the purpose in life, is to make a positive difference, not to prove how smart we are or how right we are.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I love what you said.
And good for overachievers, I think. Like, just very, very good reminder.
Right. Absolutely. And to constantly evolve. I love, evolve, right? To improve and evolve. I like that you added to that quote with your understanding of him. And that's so powerful to be around people who do want to be self-aware, be resilient, or the new word that's going to come out soon, to be with resilience, right? And to actually evolve in a way that makes a positive impact or difference in people's lives. Um, that's beautiful. How would you? My last question is: what does glad to be here mean to you? We've just had an incredible conversation. We went deep. We went all through different things. I'm grateful. I'll start with it, just for you to be on the show. Thank you for all your wisdom, your knowledge, and your willingness to share. That research in a way that is practical for people. Like you said, it makes a difference. So I'm grateful that you were here today. But what does glad to be here mean to you right now in this moment?
Glad to be here means loving what I do, who I do it with, and who I do it for.
Wow! I'm high-fiving you over the waves here. That's one of the best I've ever heard. Say it again aloud.
Thank you.
I want people to hear this.
You bring out the best in me, I think. This is good.
Wow.
I appreciate it.
So say that again, because I want it in my heart. What does glad to be here mean again?
It means loving what I do.
Yep.
Who I do it with.
Who I do it with.
And who I do it for.
And who I do it for. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm just going to go to my debrief and feedback tonight is going to concentrate on that right there. I'm going to play that in my tape and remember this interview together and this time together. Thank you for what you're doing for so many people. And I look forward to staying in touch, and let's continue to go out there and make a difference in the world. By Insight, I look forward to it. I'm going to look forward to that. I want to take your quick assessment too, right? Where do we go to get that quick assessment?
This is a fun one. We, for the launch of Insight, 5 years ago, put together a 14-item subset of our bigger self-awareness assessment, kind of like as a, just quick, easy way to see where you stand. You fill out 14 questions. The system will send it to someone who knows you well. They fill out 14 questions, which takes
Oh,
no
wow.
more than 5 minutes each. And then you get a report back on your high level internal and external self-awareness, as well as usually about 2 or 3 specific things you can do if you decide, you want to improve in either of those areas. So if anybody wants to take that, it's totally free, mostly just to help people, in their journey. It's www.insight-quiz.com.
Nice. Insight-quiz.com. I'm jumping on that right now. Oh, thank you so much. What a beautiful, beautiful time together. And we'll continue, Tasha, to stay in touch. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.